So, hi everybody. I hope at least half of you are awake after lunch. I'm actually a little bit sleepy myself here. So, I'll be covering supply chain insights without the training manual, and you see why I write without the training manual in a bit, and it's agents on a pharma context graph. All right, so supply chain. So my background isn't in supply chain, but I dove into this project because that's what happens at Boehringer Ingelheim. I'm with a central data science team, and they place us wherever we're needed. And it just so happens somebody needed a data science on this supply chain project. So supply chain is pretty basic. It's ingredients, combine them, get a product, and sell them on the market. Why are we actually doing this project? Well, I spent a little bit of time with the SMEs that are running this project, and a very big issue they had was that we have all this data, we know it's buried in different sources, and we usually have to work pretty hard to get it, right? It's the same problem you've seen in a different face here, but this is the why. We want to be able to make decisions quicker. We want to be able to access all that data and make use of it. That's buried in all these different sources and silos, and sometimes even in colleagues' minds. That's why we have so many meetings, to make all these decisions. So primarily, we want efficient decision making. Your supply chain is a little more complicated than what I showed you, but even this is pretty basic. So starting materials, you're manufacturing an active ingredient, you're adding excipients to it, manufacture bulk, you have SKUs or SKUs, stock keeping units, identifying the materials at any stage in that development pipeline. Packaging is done by different business partners. That may not be the people who are actually doing the manufacturing, but there's a lot going on here, all the way down to when it shows up on a market where you might have people who are doing long-term forecasting from finance, right? What volumes are we going to sell or move based on the different markets that we're looking at? And for those of you who think of supply chain as warehousing, supply chain logistics, etc., this is not what that's about. It's basically just being able to access the information in this particular pipeline without how long does it take for us to move goods from A to B, or how much do we have in our warehousing. Of course, that could be part of it later, but that's not what the focus of this project was. And your supply chain insights, like I said, it's from many different sources. I only list about 5 of them here. As the project went on, we're not supposed to be on the project for that long, so I probably have about 6 or so months to work on this, but I noticed that our business owner kept adding more and more data sources, right? And that kept getting me worried, because each data source, as you know, you need to either understand it, clean it, figure out exactly what you're going to be doing with it. And that's, for some of these data sources, that's not an easy task. You need to sit down with those SMEs for God knows how long just to understand exactly how they're pulling out the knowledge they have from that. It's never dump the data and give it to an LLM and it just works. So the how, our mission is to unify and organize Boehringer's external supply chain data so it's easily accessible to all, enable supply chain transparency, increase opportunities for efficient decision making. That decision making popping up again here. And if you do that, you probably also are able to open up new ways to use that data, and that's what I kind of want to highlight today. A little history. So this project is actually phase 2. It was done about 1.5 years ago, and again, the idea had been we're supply chain. This is classical knowledge graph territory. You put all your data together, and they created a knowledge graph, not with Neo4j, I think it was with Stardog. That's the official supplier for the knowledge graphs we're using. But they have this knowledge graph. Not being a semantic engineer myself, I took a course on just the whole world of triplets, Sparkle, etc. And I found it required quite a bit of time for you to become productive in it, right? But what we did is, with that knowledge graph, we've got extracted data from structured data, PDFs, combined from master data. We've got a little UI that's sort of 8 bubbles that you click on depending on what you want. If you're Remember what I showed you earlier? Each of these sections in this pipeline might be of interest to someone else, maybe someone in finance, maybe someone who's just interested in who's doing the manufacturing, etc. But that's how they structured this drill down search. It works, and it works with Sparkle queries. You get tabular results, but you have to be trained to use it, right? And that's where you create a kind of barrier if you have to have people trained to really understand how to use your tool. That's one of the things I was kind of railing against. And we have pre-scripted questions, right? So this is driven by a series of competency questions people want to answer, right? And what they did was they pre-scripted these questions. You've got Sparkle behind the scenes, and it hits your knowledge graph when people click on these questions for a particular product or whatever it is they're searching for. What this can't do is you can't ask questions spanning multiple entities, or there's a little freedom in the kinds of questions you can ask. They're pre-scripted. There's no end-to-end supply chain visualization. That means if I, as a product manager, want to trace my product A, from all the ingredients that go into it, the manufacturers, the suppliers, where they're based, etc., all the way down to the market, I can't really do that without working quite hard in that drill down and collecting that information, right? There's no scenario simulation, like what if? What if our supplier in this location goes down? You can't do that. And the focus was a lot of just retrieval only. There's no analysis or action or actively preventing something from happening with your supply chain. So that manual search for closest predefined questions is a poor user experience. So yeah, we do have something that works, but the vision is you want to move from the way it was before across these, data access, visibility, risk analysis, scenario planning. We did move from, it being fragmented, manual spreadsheets, multi-day fire drills, etc., and we centralized that into a knowledge graph. And yeah, you can do that in a few minutes. You can get whatever you want, but it's still this drill down and the need to be taught how to use it. That knowledge graph is producing tables per entity, and you're assembling it yourself. And things like risk analysis, scenario planning, etc., are not possible on what we currently have. We want to move here. This is our vision, right? Be able to ask in plain language, full end-to-end, origin to shelf, automated graph analytics, and even simulation if that's possible. All right. So the way I want to present this to you is I had a lot of conversations with the SMEs just to figure out what it is they're struggling with. And there was a range of things that people actually wanted to do. That supply chain is pretty extensive, and not everybody's doing the same thing or requiring the same information from it, right? So I picked out just these 4 to start with and focused on that for that POC I wanted to actually do. So we might have someone from regulatory operations specialist, Alice, questions about sites, product exposure, speed, completeness, etc. Bob, product supply manager. This person might need to trace any product's full journey, as I outlined earlier. Marie, supply chain resilience. Where are the weaknesses in our supply chain, right? What are the choke points, etc. And then you might have a portfolio strategy and commercial ops who cares about revenue, risk, etc., the what ifs. And we can walk through each of these use cases to see how that POC kind of addresses this. So what you want to be able to have is, just ask and get. That's the retrieval that the previous tooling and a lot of the projects we have kind of focus on. But now you can do trace through as well, end to end. You can do health checks and be able to do what if planning as well. And above all, this is what I really, really wanted. It's that usability, so that your users don't have to be trained to use it. It's intuitive, and it's kind of similar to what they're already exposed to in other fields as well. So all 4 workflows depend on that one thing, a knowledge graph schema that captures how our SMEs talk about that supply chain. I'll have a little more to say about this, but it was important for me to capture the mental model of how those products are made, rather than go to an ontology, an official ontology, and try and reuse that terminology. And we'll talk about that a little later on as well. So I wanted SME vocabulary, how they actually talk about it, and not the terminology you have in an official ontology, because when I tried to go through that with them, they too didn't really understand what these standard terms are, right? They have their own language. It's pretty simplified. It's just plain English. They have their terms. So I figured, let's get that SME vocabulary, get that manufacturing flow the way they understand it. It's not written anywhere. A lot of it is in people's heads, and it's fragmented, right? And the business partners, because this business partners is a big thing. It's all the various organizations and companies you work with that do the supply, services, etc. It's a large network. So that schema should have the right node labels. Like I said, I wanted to use the terminology that they use. So if they call it starting material, and some of them call it raw material, SMO for contract manufacturer, etc., you get used to these terms when you spend enough time with them, and you notice that some of them aren't using exactly the same terms, but the worst thing is imposing a terminology on them with an official ontology. That's one of those things where I found none of them talk that way, right? The right relationships, again, plain English, so-and-so supplies this, so-and-so manufactures that, or contains this, and the right properties. Again, same language they're using. If they usually say SKU, PCID, etc., I want that in that schema. And this was the first output of my efforts. It looks pretty simple, but some of these terms got a little tricky. But these are the terms I collected talking to the SMEs and asking them what's the difference between a substance or an excipient and a component, because some of these things really sound similar to me. How do I distinguish them? Or distributor versus vendor, company, or can one company play all of these roles? And how do you call the product at the end? Some of them are using drug product or finished product. And again, all of this will exist in, say, IDMP or ontology, but the terms that they're using don't really overlap that well with how our people talk, the people that we are trying to create this for. This was my first attempt. I used, it was end of last year. You notice the coloring there. It's just kind of trying to reflect the terms I picked out from these groupings here. And this basically just captures a little bit of that network. And I wanted this to just be able to answer a couple of those competency questions and see how that works out, right? So again, we come back to these guys. So I got that schema and got the data. It's just a little portion of that data, loaded it. And let's walk through some scenarios here. So with Alice, Regulatory Operations Specialist, let's say the situation is 5:20 p.m., QA flags contaminated magnesium stearate from a supplier. Alice needs every affected product and SKU immediately. We can do that with that drill down, but it takes quite a bit of movement through that drill down. So the idea is natural language, have an LLM or an agentic approach that hits that knowledge graph or whatever data source you have and is able to answer that without you having to make all this kind of click-through to just answer that one particular question. You'll have to excuse all the editing out here, but I couldn't produce a toy data set to really get through this quickly enough, considering I was still working on this yesterday. So, yes. So we're using actual data, but I went through the SMEs to just kind of, edit out the things that are sensitive here. But this is what the UI actually looks like. And just real quick, you're all familiar with this. It's at the bottom there, but you type in your question, and that's what pops up there. List all products using magnesium stearate. This is the canvas. It's usually blank. And the LLM here can draw on this canvas. That means whatever you ask it, it can throw it onto this canvas, or you can ask it to delete it as well. So it's part of that user experience I was kind of interested in there. And so basically it works. It draws the table and gives you everything you ask for in one shot. Second situation, supply review prep. Bob needs to show his manager the complete supply chain for my cardist. Every partner, site, intermediate, etc. Again, multiple tabs if you go with what we have today with a drill down, and assembling that full picture could be an afternoon's work. But if you have all that information already in that knowledge graph, show the supply chain subgraph for my cardist, that means, just a subgraph from the entire knowledge graph you have. This is unstable, all right? All right, from starting materials to final SKU sold in Germany. And you can get something like that. And the really cool thing here is that there is no limit to what you can do on that front end because a lot of these components already exist, right? You don't have to be a web developer. You don't have to have any kind of, sophisticated expertise in doing this. It's just, oh, let me try that component. Let me try this component. Does this one do what I want it to do? And sure enough, there's something there that is actually interactive that can give you that entire subgraph for that one particular manager for that one product, right? And you can zoom in. It's all interactive, etc., and even ask follow-up questions on it. Jump to Marie. She's a supply chain resilience lead. Natural disaster is reported in Asia. Marie needs to know immediately which BI manufacturing sites fall within that impact radius. We can't do that today with the solution we have, but if you go ahead and ask this little guy here, you'll probably recognize this. Almost everybody's heard of the Strait of Hormuz. And in this POC, I haven't actually given it geolocation coordinates, right? But it seems to nail it. A lot of that is probably just parametric memory in that LLM, which is pretty interesting there. And again, risk summary alternatives. If you're, well, the question isn't here, but this is the disaster site, right? If you hook this up to any API, and there are quite a few of them, that show you all the disaster scenes, it might be something that the European Zone does or the UN does, etc. There are quite a few APIs that you can use here to just map out any disaster areas. How serious is it? Does it lie within X radius of the sites that we have? So again, you get that right out of the bat with any number of mapping components that are available with your UI. Which nodes in the supply chain graph have the highest betweenness centrality? So all of that, again, comes out of the box. We can't do that with a solution we have. But because you have this, the data science, graph data science module within Neo4j, you can do all kinds of analysis on your graph that you wouldn't be able to do with what we had before. I'll skip through this, but yeah, it will give you everything. The most critical, the ones that if you take a given site down, you're taking half the graph down with you, etc. But all of this is now visible. It's all insight for free. Or if you want to do things like, given just one product, can you show me all the SKUs in all the markets that we have? Again, straight out of the box. And then the last one here, geopolitical events, elevated risk in key API supplier region, which cash cow products are exposed? The Indian government restricts ammonia exports, right? Ammonia is a starting material for some product, used in some product Y. BI has 3 months of stock. Which products are affected? Again, you can do this kind of thing again, right? It will list all the SKUs that have a dependency on ammonia or for which it's a component. Sorry about all the editing, but I think you get the general idea now, right? Okay. And you can also do the usual stuff. Generate a report of my, of course, this time I actually just generated this, but there's an actual report behind this that I just pasted over it so that I don't expose all this. And yeah, but our Kenyan supply chain, etc. You can have an executive summary, how many SKUs are affected, etc. What substances are involved. All of that just comes free out of the box. If we go under the hood, this is basically what it looks like. I try to be as, each one of these columns are a repository. I try to be as modular as possible. Is that a warning for me? All right, and the bits I'd like to kind of just draw your attention to is this was pretty useful, this AGUI. That's the Agent User Interface Protocol. That's how this agentic framework here, I used Google ADK, connects to that front end. That means that you don't have tooling just from this back end here, the usual MCP tooling or API calls, etc. What you can do now is you can use tooling in the front end. That means you can create tools that do all that mapping, all that use of the components you just saw, and that LLM knows because it speaks AGI, and so does your front end there. And then here, this is where that Neo4j comes in. Everything you see here is all open source. The Neo4j I actually used is just the community edition. Of course, this is a POC, so this will have to change the minute we want to scale up on the data that we're using. The next steps. All right. There's a lot to this project, but I just picked these 4 things that I thought I would talk about. It's incomplete. We still have a couple of months. And I'm not entirely sure if we can go from POC to product as quickly as I would like it to go. But we're going to give it a shot anyway. So like I said, ontology versus SME vocabulary, I went for SME vocabulary. I did a lot of that with a human, with a coding agent, and we're going to move from POC to hardening, mostly because I'd already been thinking ahead, right? It wasn't just POC, you throw it away. I was thinking, if this actually works, how do we convert this into a hardened product, production-ready product? I'll have a few things to say about that. And the data quality and maturity, I think you can already guess that this is probably 80% of the work. It is a real showstopper. And at times it has me thinking, why did I get myself into this? But I have to actually work on that, because if we don't solve that, then none of the stuff you saw is actually possible, right? And then, of course, hallucinations and trust. This pops up whenever you're using LLMs. So the next thing we did was we called on Conrad, Alex, and Keys from Neo4j to team up with the SMEs to give me something that reflected the reality versus my little toy project. And that's what we did as the first step. The next one was, she doesn't look like me, but that's basically me, right? Working with a coding agent. There's a lot to say here, and maybe it will come up later on, but because you have a coding agent doesn't mean everything suddenly becomes easy, right? There's a lot, if you do this in a really structured way, I won't jump into that unless people actually want to know that. It is actually possible to build something that is hardened and resilient enough, and you're mostly doing this by focusing on tests, integration tests, unit tests, etc., to make sure that this little guy here doesn't drift off and start doing things that it thinks are helpful, but just completely ruin your whole setup. So you can really get a lot out of this if you do it in a very structured way and make sure you have checkpoints all along the way. And then there's a lot of data issues, but I just wanted to draw your attention to this particular one. One of the most important things about a supply chain is knowing where your suppliers and manufacturers, where everything's coming from, right? You can't have a virtual address, you can't have a PO box. You have to have a physical address where people can trace you down if you get any contaminated ingredients, or if there's something that you need to be traced back to, or whatever the case might be. So this is actually pretty important. But the problem was, if you have so many data sources, they all have different ways of recording all these addresses, right? And what we call master data within BI seem to have been built by combining all of these data sources. So you wind up with all of these different data types identified here. Identical records. Identical records across different source systems, you can kind of collapse that. What you're really interested in, even it's just the entity itself, the physical entity. But that physical entity, because of all the different sources, sometimes has one MDG ID, that master data ID, representing various spellings of a similarly named company, or sometimes a different company. There's all kinds of reasons why this happens. And then type 3, you have 3 IDs representing one entity. So really, all you want is, can I just get this entity and ignore what is supposed to be a unique ID but isn't? This is a real mess. You've got about 1 million records that you have to sift through to correct this. I won't talk about exactly how we did that now, but that's one of the major things. And then here, I've been concerned with the whole, how can you trust what your LLM is giving you back, right? And I'm using these LLMs in different ways. I'm using them like units of intelligence, semantic intelligence. You can do a lot with them, but the problem is, how do you know what they're giving you back isn't hallucinated? Well, they're much better than they used to be, but there's still a probability that it's going to hallucinate. And one of the things I was experimenting with is, what if you give an LLM, two LLMs the same question, and you are interested only in highly structured data, which is exactly what we're doing here, right? A lot of that data is highly structured. So if you give them the same instruction, same question, and you ask them to actually give you a response, there's a probability that these keys and values are going to match. If they match, great. You go into you can trust that the output of that unit. The reason being that if you actually use that probability of being wrong, or sorry, probability of it being correct, and you combine those two probabilities, you can actually drive down the probability that it's going to be wrong in this way. And if you add a third one, that almost just saturates it out. You can be almost 99% certain that if they match, that it's actually the correct output. And I thought, all right, yeah, so I don't need a judge here. I want this to be deterministic, right? Because that way you don't introduce more uncertainty because you have an LLM judge. Now it's just a deterministic comparison. And the way it works out is actually pretty beautiful. And you're not going to eliminate hallucinations, but you can really drive down your probability of it being, if you assemble them this way, the probability of you getting the wrong result there. So this is something I have actually implemented just a few weeks ago. It's in a little component that I call the address splitter, but you're processing, maybe 50,000 addresses. Some of them are concatenated, some of them are incomplete, etc. You can send it through this to just give you a structured output that I then send over to a resolver, and we won't go into the details of how that works, but this has been my struggle for the past few weeks to just solve this data issue before I go back to what I really want to do, which is harden that front end so that you can give it to users to start using. But what I had so far seemed to have gotten pretty good responses from the SMEs. I had them walk through it with the competency questions we had, and one of them really got excited about the ability to plot that subgraph because it's something apparently they've been trying to do for a while. So you pretty much get quite a lot by focusing on that, all the different things you can do with the graph itself, the Neo4j graph. There's a lot in there if you can organize your data well enough and reflecting the problem that you're actually working on. The rest of it is really just how creative are you in assembling something around it to use that data to solve all those problems. So, shorter path to decision making, and Alice retrieves in one sentence, Bob visualizes any product journey, Marie diagnoses weaknesses before they matter, and Pierre simulates futures. So that's as far as we've gotten so far. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mambwe.